All right, so we will go ahead and get started. It looks like we have not quite all of our viewers on, but in the essence of time, I think we'll go ahead and get started today. So first of all, I just want to say thank you all for registering and giving me the opportunity to jump on virtually with you all. Obviously, we'll be doing many of these in person. I think that's been a big point of contention across our district is where is our representation, right? We would love to meet in person and have these discussions in person. This is just an introductory opportunity for those, some of you have met me, those of you that haven't. This gives us an opportunity to all come together from all corners of our district, all the way up past Libby, down past Bozeman and Madison County and Dillon, and all be in one collective space. So even though we're a big state, I like to say we're a small town in a big state. And so this gives us an opportunity to come together and talk about what's important in our communities, whether it's rural, in one of our cities, or otherwise. So I'm just going to take a few minutes. Actually, I'll introduce a few features here, just some housekeeping items. So at the bottom of your screen, those of you that have not used Google Meets before, there's a little hand. And if at any point, this is not me preaching to you, this is my hope is that we can talk through some of these items. So if at any point you have a question or a comment, feel free to hit that little hand button. If multiple people hit it at the same time, it'll let me know who raised their hand first. And so we can choose an order there. So I do have a couple of my team on as well. If something happens, Maggie or Kenneth, and I cut out, maybe just shoot a message or something and let me know so that I know that we're having some tech difficulties. Otherwise, I'll just keep chugging along. So by a show of hands, how many of you have met me at one of our events so far and heard? Okay, we got a couple hand raises. Perfect. Thank you. And I know we have people from all corners of the district. You can go ahead and put your hand down, Elizabeth. Thank you, unless that's a question. Perfect, thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and give a background on myself as a candidate, what got me into this race, and then I'll jump into the questions that you guys presented to me. My hope is that we'll have at least 30 minutes or so to have some open discussion. On each one of the questions, the way I'll do it is I'll chat through a few minutes of just my background and professional history and my reason for joining you all. And then I'll jump into the questions that you guys submitted on your questionnaire. But on each one of those questions, I'd like to provide a couple minutes of discussion time after each question. So if anyone has additional thoughts or concerns, again, just raise your hand and I'm happy to chat through it. So I just ask that we be respectful of one another. I know you guys marked that on the survey, but we do have people from all three parties on our call today. And so I think that's a wonderful showing that we as Montanans are coming together. That's the whole basis of this campaign, is bringing us back together as Montanans and focusing on the things that are important to us to move forward together in 2026. So a little bit about me. I was raised in the Bitterroot Valley, so I'm a Stevensville boy. Grew up there on a small farm, pretty modest upbringing, and absolutely loved it. Those were my humble beginnings, as I say, and I think the things I learned as a farm kid growing up in the Bitterroot Valley are things that I've carried with me through my entire adult life, and that childhood really taught me things like, to be hardworking but humble, and to give back to community and family values and other things that I think a lot of us as Montanans really cherish. I left Montana in, I guess it was 2004, 2005, and joined the U.S. Navy. I was attending Montana Tech at that time, and I had the call to duty. I really felt like it was time for me to step out of Montana and serve our country, and came from a background of both sides of my family had served. My dad's side was Navy, my mom's side was Army, and so I always make the joke that I was going to piss somebody off no matter which way I decided to go. So I decided to go Navy, join the Navy as a search and rescue swimmer, and spent most of my time doing avionics work on that helicopter squadron that I was a part of. I was in Virginia City this last weekend, and I talked a little bit about some of the things that really made that service unique. It gave me a different real world perspective, which is really what I wanted coming out of Montana, but it also taught me things that, I guess made me question some of the ways our government operates. We've heard a lot about government waste, and I saw firsthand some of that in the military. I think many of us can agree our military industrial complex is massive. We spend an immense amount of taxpayer dollars every year on maintaining our military, and I saw firsthand that that isn't always a need. We would go and fly helicopters for days on end just to burn jet fuel so we wouldn't lose the budget for the following year. And that's taxpayer dollars. And there's so many other better uses for that funding, and especially in a time when we're in such significant, debt as a nation. I think we need to be smarter about where we're spending that money, but also prioritization, right? Are we taking care of our own people? And I think the answer to that is no. After my time in the military, I got out, I finished my education. My undergrad was in nutrition. I was injured while I was serving, spent a great deal of time in recovery, broke my back in 3 places. And so I'd fallen in love with health and wellness. So I decided to pursue a career in that. So I did my undergrad in nutrition, spent some time in health and wellness, working in personal training and community nutrition. That is what got me into my first philanthropic endeavor, where I pedaled coast to coast to raise money for a nonprofit that I had started called Pedal for Prevention. And the goal of that was to raise awareness around childhood obesity. Today, 1 in 5 children are battling childhood obesity. And as many of you probably know, that has lifelong consequences in terms of health effects. Through that process, I decided to go back and finish my master's, and studied business and kind of got into a route of finance. And really that, my goal was always to start my own business. And that time in finance taught me a lot about how the banking system works. It obviously has its ups and downs as well, just like our government. There's a lot of good that banks do, but there's also a lot of areas that I feel they take advantage of our citizens and communities, and there's ways I think they can really do better. Some of my policies are based around lending reform and mortgage reform, and really shaped towards using the tools at hand smarter so that we can get more people into housing and not drown people in heavy interest loads. And we'll talk about those today a little bit. But one of my favorite things through that time in banking was studying small business and supporting our small business. I ran an entire market in Denver, and with my leadership background, I had no idea what I was doing getting into banking. But really, I focused on really just the community aspect and relationship building, and quickly rose to top 1% in that company within 18 months, just by focusing on taking care of our communities. And so many times today, our small business are forgotten, and we've gone towards this route of consolidation and huge corporations, and many of our small businesses, especially here in Montana, are stuck struggling in the middle ground, and we're seeing the price of that today, especially with tariffs and some of those other things that we'll talk about in the Q&A session. But one business that I particularly fell in love with was a childcare company. It was one of my clients, and they were sunsetting, getting ready to close their doors. But just like in Montana, I was in Colorado at the time, it was a childcare desert. It was a huge need for that whole community. And so a friend of mine that was working in that company and I decided to start Rocky Mountain Kids. And what had started as a side project, I was still working at the bank, quickly rose. Within 6 years, we went from 2 to 42 locations. and we're caring for 9,000 kids plugged into our public education and charter school education systems there in Colorado through COVID, through some major education cuts, both federally and statewide, and had to navigate a lot of those both with city and state governments. And that's really what got me thinking, how vital it is to have this background and knowledge of how all of these things plug in together and what government really should do in terms of governing for the people instead of trying to govern on behalf of our billionaire class and our special interest. So long story short, back in 2020, we lost our oldest daughter to leukemia. We had a firsthand exposure of how terrible our healthcare system is in this country. And it was an eye-opener for my wife and I and our kids that life is short and we wanted to live where we wanted to live and be close to family. And so we moved back to Montana with, great hopes on being able to move close to home and have, a little simpler life, not knowing that there was this massive housing crisis here in Montana that had already started. And so upon our arrival, we looked into Bitterroot where I grew up, we looked in Missoula. And to be quite honest, we have 6 kids. And so it's not like a 2-bedroom apartment necessarily works for us. We could have made it work, but it wasn't really in our best interest for sanity purposes probably. But we were able to find something out here in St. Regis, Montana. And that's where we decided to settle. That was within our budget. And I don't know if any of you have been out this way, but it's absolutely beautiful area, very small town, very small county. And we learned pretty quickly about some of the things that small counties like this are continuing to face, even in the 2020s, that we saw in the 80s and 90s and before then even. So one of those is schools were struggling. Our school still is struggling to, they still haven't found a math teacher for 2 years for the high school. Part of that is pay related. A big part of that is housing related. So many times they'll find somebody, that person will agree to temporarily agree to take a job. They'll start looking for housing and they quickly realize the wage versus housing cost just does not add up. And so if you look into that statewide and even countrywide, that's a massive issue. So one of my big policies that we'll talk about in a little bit is based around education reform, but also that wage and wealth gap that continues to widen, even for some of our professions like teaching and some others. Needless to say, we ended up selling our company in October. We had an opportunity to merge with another small private company like ours that had like interest and high values. And my wife continues working for them now, along with all the other staff that were once part of Rocky Mountain Kids, doing great work there in Colorado, amongst other states as well. And so I was faced with this opportunity in October with no real intent to be a politician. I think, as a Montanan, I think most of you can probably understand my excitement when I was like, maybe I can afford to take a 6 months or a year off of work or work part-time and enjoy a really good hunting season and a really good summer and spend some time with the kids. And then November happened. So Mr. Trump was elected and January, February came around, and it was just one policy after another that really turned me off. And whether it's cuts to pediatric cancer research, I told you I'd lost my daughter, cuts to our VA, being a veteran, cuts to our Department of Education. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And here we are 6 months later, 8 months later, I guess, in a pretty dangerous position, I think is a light way to put it, both in terms of the state of our democracy, but also economically. I think we're on the brink of some dangerous landscape when it comes to that piece. So I have spent the last 4 months immersed in our communities, and some of you may not have seen me. I haven't spent a lot of time in our bigger cities. So I'm talking democratic hubs like Missoula, somewhat in Bozeman and areas like that. And I'll tell you the reason why. When you study the data, really what we see is a big swing in some of our rural areas. And I think there's a big opportunity to connect with some of those folks that are both moderate conservatives and independents. And so this first 4 months, I've really spent doing that community immersion, plugging into some of our smaller counties and communities, and doing a couple of the bigger events in some of our bigger cities, and just asking a lot of questions. I didn't come out in this campaign in April with a set of policy or objectives. I came at this from an angle of coming from the working class, being a father of 6, wanting Montana to be an affordable place, not just for me into my retirement in the next 30 years, but really for my kids to be able to stay here and afford to live here in Montana as well. And some of you, I'm sure, have kids and grandkids, and you probably think the same thing. The state of just basic affordability in Montana has really climbed to unreachable levels for anyone that, if you want hard numbers, is basically making less than $150,000 a year. The average 3-bedroom home now, the median income needed to purchase a 3-bedroom home in Montana is now $180,000 a year. I just don't know a lot of people who can afford that. And so it's unrealistic, and we don't have government officials, no matter what party you tend to affiliate with. Right now, we don't have government officials that are thinking about our working class, that are thinking realistically about our housing crisis, that are thinking realistically about taking care of critical programs like Social Security and Medicaid, that are thinking about how to deal with the rising cost of healthcare and how that's 66% of our bankruptcies in this country are medically related. And so the core issues that are really affecting quality of life and affordability for the people of Montana are not being paid attention to. We're continuing to be represented by millionaires and billionaires who are out of touch with what it's really like to try and raise a family in this state or start a career in this state. And so that's why I'm running. I'm running for those people. I'm running for people like you, for people like me, and for true Montanans who really want to preserve both the conservation side of our state, but also just the ability to live and stay here. So I'll pause there. I just want to give anyone an opportunity to ask questions about my background or make any comments if you'd like before we move into some of your questions, and we can go from there. So. Anybody? Suzette, would you mind unmuting yourself, Ms. Jensen?
I moved here 4 years ago from Des Moines, Iowa. I was very active in the Democratic Party in Polk County, Iowa, which happens to be a blue county. I think the only one in Iowa right now. And I'm pleased to hear that you're out listening, because one of my main complaints about the campaigns in the last go round we had was candidates meeting with all their big dollar donors. And a lot of times, I mean, the minimum to go to some of the events was $100. And there are a lot of people who can't afford that. And meeting with other people. But one of the groups that I think got neglected was the younger group. I have a 30-year-old grandson who lives here. I have a 27-year-old granddaughter. My grandson works remotely. He's a computer engineer. There are no jobs here for him in his field, so he's on a remote job. My granddaughter right now, she just moved back from Helena, and she's looking for a job. And she's moved back home. Colin is fortunate. He's 30, and he was able to, he's bought a house, but he bought a house with another friend. And I think that group, I hope that you make some time to meet with them and talk with them. I'm a baby boomer. I'm the leading edge of the baby boomer. So, I got the best of it all. Right? Good schools, good teachers. My husband served in Vietnam. And now I see all of this. My daughter, 57, who says there isn't going to be any Social Security for me.
Mhm.
And I've paid into it all these years. There isn't going to be any. So I encourage you, and I'll help any way I can, to listen to some of these younger people because their concerns need to be heard.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. And I'll tell you, that's one of our prime focuses because I think they're the ones who can fix this. I think if they're given the right support and the right opportunity to have their voice not only heard, but policy implemented that actually affects them and not just an elitist population, I think there's a big opportunity for them to turn around what the face of American politics really looks like. Because what we're looking at is the back end of Reagan years that have come to just show their ugly teeth, right? I mean, really what we're looking at is a growing wealth distribution since then that has widened to the point where the top 1% hold more wealth than the bottom 90% combined in this country. And so in order to fix this, we have to shift that. And the only way to shift that is to begin properly assessing taxation on that 1%. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying we tax them at 90% or 80% or something crazy, but there's many, many, many loopholes in our tax code, like stepped up basis and some other systems that really allow for them. I mean, Jeff Bezos paid less in taxes last year than I did. And I can tell you, I did not make even pennies on his dollar, right? And so I think what we have to do is elect officials who, one, have a moral compass, that helps, but two, also have a realistic sense of reality of what it's like to try and find a job or find an opportunity to live and work in this state, and honestly all over this country. Many other places are facing the same same housing crisis and same cost of living that Montana is. So thank you for your comments, but I agree. I think we have to stay plugged into the college and 20 to 30-year-old, and honestly 20 to 40-year-old population. And I'm not afraid to share with you guys, I'm 40 years old. I've done a lot in my young life. I mean, I definitely think I have more experience than most, especially at my age. Some good, some devastating. I've shared with you some of that. But all of those values and experiences have forged me to a position that I really feel like I have a really good sense of reality on what needs to be done. And I think we need some people that are in touch with reality in DC. And that's what I aim to do. So we do have another hand up though, Mary, and thanks for contributing.
Hi, Russ. I'm in Butte, and
Right.
I've been in Montana since 1999. We
Mhm.
came out here when my husband took a job as a professor at the college, and he's retired, and I'm disabled, and we're a pretty motley crew. But I've been involved in Democratic politics in the state through the last 5 political cycles.
Mm.
And one Democratic candidate after another lost to a Republican in this position that you're running for. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, and I actually want to thank you for being willing to step up. It's difficult here. And this is the first time that I can remember when we've had only one Democratic candidate in the primary so far. Some people may still come out, but I just want to say that I sense a shift of the general political level of involvement brought on by the current regime. And we've got these organizations like 5051 and Indivisible, whatever, trying to, and you have to take advantage of those things because generally speaking, people in the past have been very cynical about beating this person. We've had an R in this congressional seat since 1999 when I came here. So we're ready for a change.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your thorough and informed presentation. But I guess what I'm saying is, I want to believe that we can turn the corner here, and I appreciate your willingness to talk to anybody, because I think the divisiveness we've tried to somehow leverage that, and it's gotten us nowhere. So I wish you luck, and I intend to be there. And I'm just sitting on my pocketbook to see who else comes out. And, when the time comes, I'll be there.
I appreciate your comments, and I'm going to push back on you a little bit. So out of love here, and this is my opinion on that. I've said this a couple times over the last week because I feel pretty passionate about this. If there's not other candidates in this race right now already, the way I feel, at least, and I hope you'll see my side of this, is that with everything that's going on and the work that needs to be done, if you're not entering this race already, and this goes out to any of the other candidates who are going to be watching this later and maybe considering a run, I welcome you as a primary contestant, but you had better get in this race soon, because here's the thing: is there is work to be done, and there's a lot of people like you, Marion, that are wondering who that contestant pool is going to be. However, I don't have much respect for someone that waits it out till January or February to get in this race and start pushing back on some of the other things that are going on personally. Now, I'm not a political expert that's been doing this 30 years, and I know some people have a lot of other things going on in their life to weigh in. However, we're in an incredibly vulnerable position. The Democratic Party is at an all-time low favorability rating. There's infighting going on that side. Republicans aren't much better. There's infighting going on that side. Many independents, I think, that voted right are regretting it. And honestly, many Republicans are. I spent my last week in Kalispell, and there were dozens and dozens of Republican folks that came and visited with me and one of my staffers, Leonette, that basically just admitted to feeling like they'd been taken advantage of, right? And that's a start. To me, that's a big start. We're already 8 months in on this presidency, and there already is a sense of distrust. Finally, I don't know why it took so long, no offense, but I think at least it's something, right? And so I would say to you and others, yes, I am the only candidate, but yes, I'm the one that's been out asking you all for the last 4 months what's important to you. And so I just encourage you to keep that in mind, that I've trust me, there's a much easier path for me in this too. It's a marathon, and I've put 20,000 miles on my little beat up Tacoma over the last 4 months. But I've also enjoyed every minute of it, because one, I love Montana, but two, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of people whose voices aren't being heard. And I think if you're not out listening to those people, you're not going to get the full picture in a 4 months time frame, or even a 6 months time frame. I think it takes time being out there and listening and seeing almost the before and after effect of some of the administrative decisions happening right now to appropriately assess and implement policy that's going to make impactful change for ordinary Montanans. So we'll have, let's see, we have Rita's next. Go ahead, Rita.
There, I'm unmuted. I saw you in Whitefish, and you spoke my language. So I'm like, I am going to volunteer for that, man. I'm just wondering, like, I follow Flathead Democracy locally.
Sure.
Are you going to have your own, like, headquarters, or are you working a lot with them? Like, what could I do in the Kalispell Whitefish area to help support you?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. So I just hired a community coordinator for the Kalispell area. Just so
Okay.
happens she's also involved with Flathead Democracy. So those
Okay.
those groups that, you know, she'll wear different hats, obviously, but you probably know Leonette. She's now one of my staffers on my team, but she's going to be pushing hard to really.
Lynette?
Yep.
Lynette is? Okay. All right.
Yep. And so she'll be working endlessly, I'm sure, up there. Sorry, Leonette, if you're watching. But you've also got a lot of work ahead of you. But you know, we have to stay plugged into that Kalispell community. Kalispell, for those that don't know, has grown 25% in the last 5 years. And so that's a massive amount of influx of people.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, a large amount of people that we don't have a lot of data on in terms of voter history, right? And so it's really important to be in front of them, knocking doors, talking to them at fairs and festivals, and getting a better assessment of where they stand, and you know, pushing to get them involved. Jesse, who's in the tech strand, is my communications director. He just put a link in the chat for anyone that wants to volunteer. So we now have a full system set up to onboard volunteers. So I encourage you to click that link, or you can also find it off the website. But if you're interested in volunteering, even if some of you are just saying, hey, I'm happy to sit at a tabling event for you. Maybe you don't like walking around knocking on doors or calling. That's fine. We'll use everybody wherever they're at. Because one of the messages to you all tonight is that in order to beat this wave of red that many of you had questions about, we have the numbers, but we just have to get our numbers out. And that means every single person has to realize that they have a hand in turning the page on this. It can't just be me, both financially and I got a lot of energy, guys. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a ball of energy and I'm a go-getter, but I can't do this alone. It's going to take hundreds and hundreds of us out in Montana making this movement happen. And so the fire started, and I think we're seeing it grow rapidly now, both on social media and at events. I'll tell you, my first few events that I did was maybe 8, sometimes 2 people, but 8, 10 people. Now we're looking at 30, 40, 50 people. And instead of being all Democrats, we're looking at, you know, 20 to 30% independent and Republican. And that's the mix we want, because what that tells me is that there's people that see me moderate enough that they're willing to not vote party line down one side. And I'm capturing some of those agricultural and more conservative views financially that can give them the vote of confidence to say, hey, this guy's not going to let us down when it comes to some of these other policies that are important to us. So,
Okay.
We had Brian next, and then Steve, I see you waving your hand there. If you don't mind hitting the little hand button that puts you in the queue on the questions there. So, Brian, nice to see you, Brian.
Yeah, nice to see you again. I think we met at your rally at Trisha's place, Trisha in Bozeman. So this may be a little bit preaching to the choir, but hear me out, because I think this might be a way of framing the issue. I was watching an economist the other night talk about tariffs, and this person said that the tariffs would probably bring in $3 trillion into the federal treasury, which coincidentally is about the amount that the recent budget reconciliation bill that Zinke and our senators voted for is going to cost the treasury. So what we basically have happened is that income tax largely levied on upper income and very high income people have been reduced. And I really don't want to use the term tariff anymore. I want to call it a national sales tax, which is what it is now being levied on working class and middle class people. This has been the tariffs. There's not been a vote. We have had no say in the matter. And when you were talking before about, and others have said, you had problems, buying a house when you move back to Montana. And I think Suzette, you mentioned, your grandchildren having issues, being able to stay in Montana. That's maybe taking 15% out of the budget of, working class and middle class people who could have been putting that money into a down payment on a house are now paying a federal sales tax.
Right.
I really would like the Democrats, and perhaps, you, if you feel it's, when you talk to people in the state, to really emphasize that what we have is an inversion. We've had our tax structure has been flipped on its head, whereas it used to be progressive. The more you earn, the more you pay. Now it's the less you earn, the more you pay, and the more you earn, at a very high level of income, you get off almost scot-free. And this has really added to the already, serious problems of affordability. Suddenly we've got this national sales tax that's sucking, money out of our budget that, we could ill afford. And Zinke doesn't have the nerve, the courage to come and tell us to our face why he thinks this was a good idea.
Mhm.
And that is reprehensible, and he is a coward. And I think people need to know that.
Well, I obviously couldn't agree with you more on that, Brian, but also I think your assessment of the tariff structure, and we're just starting, it's been a conversation for months, but I think what many people don't realize is the lag time when you start seeing when a tariff hits, how long till shelf stock actually runs out and prices begin trickling in that are related directly, hikes to that price increase. I mean, I think we're seeing it already now. We're finally starting to see it in our produce, between that and the lack of immigration that is supporting that agriculture in California and elsewhere. We're going to see it in steel. We're going to see it in lumber. We're going to see it in major industries that affect building and construction, which inversely affect the building industry even more in Montana, which will drive our prices up. So not only, to your point, not only are we seeing that 15%, 25%, depending on what it is, increase immediately on the cost, there's going to be the increase long term on the cost in terms of inflation and some of the prices that we're going to continue battling that are going to hurt middle and lower class for years to come. So I do think it's messaging. To your point, tariffs are not good. I mean, they failed every time we've tried them, right? So I think, and one of my points we'll get to in the questions is, you can give some of the class of people that support Zinke and Trump and others are data averse, meaning it doesn't matter how great the information you have is, until they actually feel it, their minds won't be changed. And so I think, unfortunately, there's going to have to be some pain to get some gain. And what sucks is that all of us have been shouting from the rooftops that this is coming are also going to have to feel that pain. And so it's coming. So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to find the hand you were talking about. I'm on an iPhone and my technological skills are somewhat limited.
That's right.
I did have a question.
Like this, so we're good.
Yeah, right. Thank you for taking it, Russell. I'm had an experience with a financial advisor 5 years ago on a conference around how to save Social Security. And basically the gist of her presentation was that if we change only a small increase in the amount of deduction from paycheck, both the employer and the participant, and then we raise the cap, which is currently, I think, 177,000. And in your proposals, or at least in your opinion, what is the solution? Her estimate was that the whole system could be stabilized for the next 75 years with these minor adjustments, but that neither party really wanted to solve the problem. They'd rather keep it as a political football.
Right.
What is your opinion and how do you see this situation?
Yeah, I think we attack it two ways. One, the immediate need is restabilizing the infrastructure that's actually supporting Social Security. They can't actually get to the money, and I've sat through multiple briefings on this. I actually went to a third-party one. I don't know if any of you attended the Big Sky 55 Plus seminars. Those were very informative too. But long story short, the effort right now is to build distrust in the system and undermine the infrastructure. So what that looks like is 5-hour hold times on a Social Security phone call line, right? What that looks like is pushing people to get Social Security support via Twitter instead of, or X, whatever it's called now, instead of actually having a local representative that you can go to. What that looks like in places like Montana is potentially a 4-hour drive for you to actually go to an office and see somebody. And then in those offices, what that looks like is understaffing to where you think DMV is bad. There could be potentially hours long. So when I say building distrust in the system, what they're trying to do, the pool of money is still there. And the issues that you're talking about in the immediate are about the actual administrative piece of Social Security. That can also be changed, the same way it's been dissolved, so to speak, or fractured, can also be repaired relatively quickly. The bigger issue is, you nailed it right on the head, is the cap itself. And it started back with, early 80s with Reagan, when we basically saw the wealth and productivity climb far away from our wage line. And so the majority of people that are actually working and putting into Social Security are far below what the actual earning potential is, or would have been, had we actually stayed on track with the economic earning line for the country. All of that profit went to that 1% that we talked about. And so to your point, we have to fix it, yes, removing the cap off of that $177,000, but we have to do it by 2032. And the reason I tell you that is, if we don't do it by 2032, we're going to see roughly a 17 to 30% reduction in benefits for people that are from 2032 to I think the figure was 2095, something like that. So the next generation of Social Security earners would see less take home because of there's not as much feeding in that should have been from those years of economic productivity. So in my opinion, it's quite simple. Execution wise, you're right. We got to get everybody on board to do that. But I'm sure you've seen in the news, there's already dialogue happening from, Department of Labor and other pieces of the Trump administration that are saying, we should eventually shutter this program and close it down. Well, this is the most stable program in American history. And so I want everyone to know that this is not a program that is not working. It's not a program that is failing. The most of the propaganda is aimed at building distrust in Social Security, when in all reality, it just needs to be properly funded. And there's a whole class of people that are being capped at that 177,000 earning, when in reality, they're making 177 million a year. And that's what's underfunding the program. So, Patty.
Hi, thank you for this session. I have a lot of questions, but I'll just come off what Suzette said about young people. I am in Bozeman, and I'm going to be assisting a nonprofit doing voter registration at Catapalooza for MSU students. And I've done this in the past, and there's a lot of usually eager people ready to register to vote. The next thing is getting them to actually vote. But how are you? What are the ways you're going to reach young people? Not only the the college age, but the people that Suzette was talking about. I'm working with another group on media literacy, and it doesn't seem, it's really hard to tell where people are getting any information from, especially young people are not getting it from the same types of news and other outlets that somebody like I am. So how are you reaching young people, and how are you planning to reach more of them?
Yeah, great question. And you're not wrong. So the interesting thing about running in a 2025 era is there's really 3 generations of outreach that you have to be responsible for, which is what makes it difficult. You have the age that still gets most of their news from newspapers and physical print. You have the demographic that still largely watches just news and doesn't read much newspaper. And then you have a generation that is almost exclusively social media. And the problem with those is, well, historically, if we go back quite a ways, only one of those, which is social media, is designed to be a for-profit industry. But in the last 20 years, we're seeing, media has really gone that way in terms of news and being very polarizing. And now with the attack on free press, NPR, PBS, there's also an effort trying to control print media and free press as well. And so that's all a targeted effort to control the dialogue that's getting to those 3 generations of listeners, if you will. And so I think, to be totally upfront before we get to how we're going to reach the voters, I think whoever the next set of legislators in, and ideally I'm one of them, needs to put some guardrails in place around how much power and influence all 3 media sources have in terms of dissolution of our democracy, as the best way I can put it. Because ultimately what's happening is this freedom of speech clause that has been leaned on so heavily to allow all 3 forms say and do whatever they want is not, now the public is now lost all trust and has no idea what's true and what's not. And so now even the most basic things that are coming out, even scientific studies and things that have peer-reviewed research and whatnot, is questioned whether it's real or not. And that's a dangerous place to be in, because what happens is an already undereducated public is now easily swayed to believe whatever gets the most views in front of their face. And that can be bought with money. And so what we need to do is limit that from, power shouldn't be manipulated through exposure to you, meaning that however many commercials you get or however many social media ads you get or whatever that looks like should not sway the factual information that helps you make an informed decision, in my opinion. But back to your original question, in terms of reaching those voters, in my opinion, the best way to actually reach people is still face-to-face, because it wasn't that long ago that we build relationships, and I still think this is true, and we build trust face-to-face. And that's why so many people, and I say this ironically, doing a virtual town hall with you all. So trust me, I see the peculiarity in that, but I've been face-to-face for the last 4 months. I mean, this is the first virtual setting I've done with anybody. So I can tell you, it doesn't matter what age you are, whether you're 18 or 81, when you sit down and talk to someone and shake their hand and look them in the eye and you talk about, how to solve real problems together, there's a connection human to human there that I think bypasses any of that other stuff. And it's not much different for kids, kids meaning young adults. And so I think we have to do a targeted effort there. I think the most targeted effort needs to be getting back to the basics and building community again. And that's what the whole campaign around Together We Can stands for, not only bringing people from the polar extremes, Republican, Democrat, whatever back to the table together, eating together, talking together like families, for many years used to do. We still focus on that heavily in my family, at least on once a week, with kids doing sports and me traveling or whatever. It's important to bring people back together, just to kind of level set on where you're at. I don't think it's that much different in a community sense. And so that's where we reach people initially. So like things you're doing, like Catapalooza, is an opportunity to just really talk to people. We saw it last week in Kalispell. I didn't approach anyone with any materials. I just asked them, what's important to you as a voter? How do you feel like things are going? Is there anything that's concerning to you? Do you feel like things are where you would want them to be, ideally based off of your last vote? And that typically springboards into other conversation. That's just like, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. And so I think that's the big one. But I do think we also have to be creative in how we get people to that point. So we're talking about doing everything from doing like a DJ live dance session on campus, to where we can get people out that are young and have energy and want to meet and talk to people and create that energetic buzz, to doing a Sunday coffee events with people in a park. I mean, we have to be willing to meet with everybody where they're at, and not have it just be one lens in a community center doing a town hall, right? I think not everybody wants to go to that type of setting. So it just takes more work on our part to be willing to look and be a little different in terms of what this campaign will do. All right, any other questions now before I jump into the Q&A session? Great, I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump right in here. And if you guys could just confirm with me that you see that. Someone holler.
No.
Great. Okay, we'll start from the top here. So there's some of these that have, obviously there were many people that submitted questions, so I kind of combined some of them that had the same tone to them. So bear with me if they're different. We can talk through them, but I tried to touch on anything that may have had a similar tone. So this one was based around, what are we going to do to restrain Trump's power right now, his authoritarian moves? And another person had asked, our democracy is at risk. If elected, what will you try to do to address the current administration's attack on nearly every facet of our way of life? I'll tell you, from an outsider coming in, one of the most challenging things in this race is the sidelining of our own party. And I love them to death. I know they've had a lot of success in the past, but there's a reason why they keep losing. As a successful businessman and as someone that is new to politics with a lot of fresh ideas and energy, it's a pretty stagnant environment. So one of the things that I think needs to happen is there needs to be some mass reform in terms of party involvement early. I don't believe you make traction in terms of changing people's hearts and minds by waiting till after primaries to get involved and start promoting candidates and ideas and that sort of thing. So I think that there needs to be an effort to be a consistent voice throughout the entire year, not this time next year. Because what happens, I think, at least my generation and many others, you get to that time when you're close to an election and everything on TV are negative ads. You get mailers after mailer after mailer. You start getting all the text messages. You start getting all the emails. And what do? We tune it all out. So one, not only is it a waste of millions and millions of dollars, but it's also a terrible strategy. And so I don't have to hire a consultant from DC to tell me that. And I know that as a Montanan, and I think most of you do too. I think the party needs to be more aggressive. And that doesn't mean as a candidate, I'm saying they should endorse me solely. I think we need more people, especially from diverse backgrounds, to enter this race to give Montanans an option on who would be the best representative of them. Clearly, I think I'm that person, but I also know that no matter who's in the race, it's a much harder race to run when you're trying to go from zero to building a network of 150, 160,000 supporters, and there's zero party support. I mean, come on, that's unrealistic. You're not helping your own party out. So that's one. The other I hate, but it's true, we're seeing it in California, is we have to be prepared, especially in states where we can, to fight fire with fire. I think Democrats for a long time have done two things wrong. And that is we continue to take the high road when they continue to punch us below the belt. We have to be willing to fight back and stop playing nice with people who don't respect rules. And so that's one of it, a part of it. The other part is I think we also have to show that we can meet them where they're at, like we're seeing in California with this gerrymandering, but do it with the polish of saying we respect the voice and the right of our voters, and we're going to do it through this correct way. I love that Gavin Newsom's doing that. It could backfire and they could lose districts, but in reality, I don't think that's going to happen, right? I think we'll see that redrawn the correct way. What I envision happening is they're going to then go to another Florida or somewhere like that and draw up another few Republican seats, and we're going to see Illinois have to do the same thing, and it'll be this back and forth. But I think we just have to be prepared to fight fire with fire. The third thing is citizens need to get involved, not only in protests, like I think it was Marion or someone else that had brought up some of our groups that are, the 50-51 and some of our other groups that are protesting and doing some amazing events nationwide. But I think it's not just protesting and it's not just donating, but like I mentioned earlier, it's find a candidate you like. And if you can donate 2 hours of your time a week, if you can donate 20 hours of your time a week, sometimes the money is only spent on trying to get outreach to voters. And so sometimes, in my opinion, a more effective way is to have people who can help you reach people. Because what might be an expensive $100 for you, that might only reach 2 or 3 people when it's spent on some type of advertising budget. In your network or your neighborhood, you could potentially reach 100 people. So that's a much better investment in terms of using our community and using our network to help move that needle. And so I think some of it's just getting back to the basics. And then obviously once flipped, I think there's some obvious things we can do to prevent this from happening in the future congressionally, to make sure that we put some handcuffs on what is actually happening in terms of passing laws that will prevent an onslaught of an executive action in the future. I'll give you an example, and I think I talk about it later in this deck, but Brian, you had brought up tariffs. So if we're looking at tariffs, having like a 60-day tariff release if it's not congressionally approved. So a president puts in a tariff, there's only a 60-day window that tariff is valid unless Congress comes in and backs it and approves it. So I think there has to be some safeguards there to put the checks and balances back in place that are just not being respected right now. And that will definitely help. So I'm going to pause there before we move on to the next question. I just want to see if there's anybody that has any comments or questions based off of my responses there. Steve. You're on mute, sir.
There we go. The local Missoula Dems have just hired a full-time organizer, which I think will hopefully move us in the right direction to activate now instead of waiting until 6 months before the election. And so I'm hopeful that that will be an action that will somewhat address the past mistakes of allowing the volunteer base to just disappear. And so hopefully get people motivated to support candidates that they care about. And I hope you benefit from that greatly. That would be
Yeah,
good.
I'm excited to see. I think that could be a model for the other committees, especially the bigger ones, because that's really what it takes is like a boots on the ground organizer.
Yeah.
Say, let's get someone who can help plan. Event planning is tough. I get it. I mean, I've been doing it the last 4 months, and largely it's been Trish, who's out of Bozeman, and I doing most of it. And we just recently had 4 or 5 other team members jump on with us. And man, just having those extra hands in the mix, it makes everything exponentially better. So I think them doing that was a very smart move on behalf of the Missoula County Dems.
Thanks.
Any other hands there? All right, perfect. I'm gonna jump back to the next one here. Next one is, how do you motivate young folks and independents to vote for you? And there was a secondary question that kind of went along with that was, how will he build a campaign to help draw out the folks that didn't vote last time? So I'll give you some quick data. We have roughly 430,000 registered voters in this district. Only 320 or 330,000 turned out. So we were missing roughly 100,000 of our voters last time, which is mind-blowing to me, right? But it's not uncommon. We've seen that time and time again. And back to whoever brought up the point about, I can't remember if it was Suzette or Marion, someone had mentioned us being this seat being a Republican seat since 1999. It's important to point out, though, that, just this last session, we went back to having 2 districts. And so that changes the demographic substantially for us in terms of, we are truly purple on the west side of the state. And so, and Monica ran a hell of a race. I mean, she worked her tail off. And I think the areas that I think I'll have a better opportunity to hit are, I'll just cover them with you quickly. I grew up in the Bitterroot Valley. That's a place where I have a well-known family name. I'm a Stevensville boy. And I think we're not going to win the Bitterroot. We're not going to win Ravalli County, but I am going to pull a few thousand votes that we didn't have on Monica's out of the Bitterroot. And that will help substantially. The same with Mineral County. I live here. I'm a coach here. This county knows me. And the amount of people that have told me they've never voted Democrat, that I'll be the first one they vote for because they know my family, know me as a person. Again, same thing. Not a couple thousand here. The whole county's only a couple thousand, but it might be 300-400 votes here. So then when we start looking at, okay, just playing with the numbers, really the county that we have to play with the hardest is Lake County. Well, it just so happens Polson's Hospital closed, right? And we've also lost $700 million in budget to our Bureau of Indian Affairs. And those are 2 areas that are going to hugely impact Lake County. And so one of the strategies is obviously pushing a lot of community involvement in those areas to help get that information out and drive that vote to, ultimately to neutralize and or flip Lake County. The rest of it is, to your point, really bring out that college vote. And so, maybe it's a little bit ambitious of me, but I think being a younger, successful 40-year-old and not being a retired lawyer out of Missoula that's 65 or 70 running for office, I think I can engage with the youth a little bit differently than what they've seen in the past. I've got 2 kids getting ready to go to college next year. And so I think it's just a matter of understanding how to market and interact with that demographic in a new way that they haven't seen before in politics. I kind of went off script there on you guys, but I think that, the bullets there touched on that was, let me pull it up here. We got engage everyone, not just Democrats. I talked about that in the Ravalli and Mineral. There is a large percentage of our district that truly identify as independent, and we have to hit those folks. And just so you all know, I'm not your far left liberal. I mean, I've been independent most of my life. I'm definitely a left-leaning independent. But I think, a lot of my support and a lot of my donors have been independents already. And so I think that's a good sign in terms of showing kind of who's turning out for that. And our strategy of staying in rural areas is helping and build some buzz there. And then I think we talked about staying focused on the high impact unifying issues, not the fringe things that tear us apart, but really getting back to some of those core things. You brought up Social Security. We talked about housing, some of those other areas that I think are going to really bring people back to the middle to say, hey, yeah, this is gonna hurt all of us, regardless of what party you're in. So I'll pause there real quick. Any questions on that one? Don't see any hands. Holler if I'm missing you. Okay. Question 3, Social Security making sustainable. We kind of talked on this, but I'll just do a quick high level overview again. It is sustainable. It is stable. So again, we need to focus on correcting the system first. The one thing I'll tell you guys that are on Social Security right now, there's already people that have missed payments. I've met and talked to people that have already been experiencing issues with this. So what I recommend you do is actually track the distributions that you should be getting and your balances by going on and printing everything out, printing out your record on paper, so that if you do experience an issue or there is some accidental data loss, right, that you have a record for this benefit that you're owed. You are owed it, and that's the thing that you need to be rest assured that you will get the payment. It just may be a pain in your butt to get it, and if you have that paperwork in order, then at least you have something on your side to help support that. But and to our point, the big fish here to fry is getting that cap removed, and Social Security is set for the next 100, 150 years. We're good there? All right, awesome. We're cruising. How can we assure the national security of America, both from foreign and internal forces? I'm glad someone asked this question, because this is where my head goes. I think, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I see Trump playing with the use of military. He tried it in California and got kind of some pushback and got his wrist slapped. And so now he's trying it in a different way in Washington, D.C. that doesn't have a knucklehead governor willing to push back with him. And so I think he's toying with what this January 6th kind of rebel army looks like in using a mega scale federal force. And that's honestly, we need to watch that. I don't know how else to slice that pie for you guys, except for to say that's probably the most dangerous part of this is, are there generals? Are there admirals? Is there people in the Pentagon to say, no, sir, that's not how our military is supposed to be used? And it's, I can tell you, having served, it's in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There is an opportunity for you to say no, because if it's not a lawful order, then you don't have to obey it. And violating the Constitution is an unlawful order directly. And our armed forces are not to be used on American soil. So what I see him doing is playing with the use of National Guard, and that is where what we're seeing in Vermont and other places where the government need to step in and say, nope, we're not sending our National Guard, right? We've seen that a couple of times already. So once elected, and obviously as we flip House and Senate, I think we can enact tighter restriction on what type of actual executive order activation without congressional approval can be used for National Guard as well. I think that we're going to see some of that, and I think it's going to build future law based off of this for the future. So I see Suzette has her hand, so go ahead, Suzette.
Just a comment on this. I know that I served on the Parks Board for 16 years in Des Moines, and I used to go to all the budget meetings for the city council. And I know the first 2 items on every city budget are the cost of police and fire. And for years, they got grant money from the federal government to do training, to do community policing, and now all of that's gone away. And instead we're bringing in National Guard and armed forces to do the job that community policing needs to be doing. And I hope that thrust comes back. I hope we get things turned around and that we can support the people who are trained to deal with their communities and not bring in outsiders who don't know the community.
Yeah, I agree. And as an extension of that, I also, through the big, beautiful bill, if you want to call it that, we've seen this huge pump of resources into ICE, which is effectively being used as a federal police force. And so I see that as a secondary, the Trump police, so to speak. I mean, all the new vehicles now are painted the same way as this plane. I don't know if you've seen that, but anyhow, long story short, I think what needs to happen is that budget has to be rolled back. If we don't have the budget for Medicaid, and we don't have the budget for VA, and we don't have the budget for pediatric childcare research, we certainly don't need a federal police force that's bigger than any other military. And so I think we have to put some checks on that in terms of rolling that back. Yeah. And especially since, I'm a big, so just, call it what it is. Democrats have been on either side of this fence on whether they are part of the defund police folks or part of the fund police folks. And I'm a firm believer that there's bad apples in every batch, but most of the police that I've met inherently want to do good. And so I think, especially here in Montana, you're going to get bad apples, but you can mitigate some of that with selection process, training, and actually funding them better. Especially since a lot of these guys are making $18-20 an hour. I mean, they're in that same boat as teachers, where it's really hard to live in this state and work and survive. And so a lot of them that had the qualifications are choosing different career paths, and we're left, what are you left with? So I think we just have to be smarter from that perspective as well. So, all right, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Question 5. Do you support trans athletes in school sports? And a similar question came up was, what is your position specifically on trans rights in sports, gender affirming care, bathroom laws, etc.? So I absolutely support anybody's right to identify with, being trans, being in whatever they feel is true to their true self. I think we have to embrace that. And here's a bit of that is, you don't legislate someone's identity away. So I think people, that needs to be more of the message is, you can make laws all you want to try and strip this away, but you don't legislate someone from, if they're gay, they're gay. If they're trans, they're trans. You making a law about that doesn't change that. I think where we've had missteps in the past are allowing the focus to be completely shifted to steal attention from other important issues, and really, at the end of the day, steal votes because of one. And to add some context to this, that this is not new for the Republican Party to do, right? We have seen historically, whether it's abortion, whether it's interracial marriage, whether it's women's right to vote, whether it's trans rights now, there's always something that becomes a hot topic that is an effort to steal focus away from what really matters. So I wanted to provide that context because my next comment to you is this. I don't think this is a fight worth continuing to fight. And not because I don't think it's important, but because I think we continue to let the ship be derailed over a few people in our own state. We're talking 10 athletes in the NCAA, when in reality, this should be a league decision to manage, not a federal decision to manage. And so that's my approach to this is I don't think this should be federally legislated. I think this should be pushed to let the NCAA handle it how they want to handle it, let a MHSA handle it how they feel they want to handle it. And I think if there's enough people to do this, you support doing a trans league or a unisex league, or allow it. If we're going to allow that to happen, then we say, hey, then yes, biological females can play in biological male sports, and biological males can play in biological female sports, and it doesn't matter that they're trans or not trans. So I think we have to be careful how we continue to latch onto these trigger issues, because what I call them are campaign killers. Is it becomes all about that one issue, and what ends up happening is 53,000 people lose Medicare in the state. It ends up what we do is we try and take care of this unique set of folks who deserve protection, but in turn we lose massively, and tens of thousands of people lose their lives over it. And so I think we just need to be a little bit more aggressive on some of the pushback here. So I'm going to stop there with that, and I'm sure there's some questions on that one. So anybody want to discuss that further?
No.
Brian.
Yeah, whenever I hear somebody say that, we have, what if somebody is using a bathroom and somebody who biologically of a different sex is using it as well, I'd say, then if it's that much of a concern, then let's have a fund that would make funds available to either both to government agencies and restaurants or public places to convert their bathrooms to gender neutral, and we'll just be done with the problem instead of using it as a cudgel to really attack people's lifestyles. There's a practical way to deal with the issue if people are concerned about it. That's my feeling about it.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money. I think there is a practical way. I've traveled a lot. I've been blessed to be able to travel to South America and Central America, all over Europe. You'd be surprised. Like a lot of places you go, I'm sure some of you have traveled. You go into a bathroom and it's individual stalls. They're basically their own closet. Everyone shares a sink, and no one pays 2 cents to who's in there, and it doesn't really make a difference. So I think the fear mongering is what comes in, is that some predator is going to come in and violate someone that they feel should be using that bathroom. And in reality, if someone's a predator and they're going to do that, as we've seen now with our own administration and the Epstein list and everything else, is they're going to continue to do that whether you put a sign on the door that it's for females only or males only anyways. And so I think it's just fear mongering. And so I do agree, though, that it's a simple logistics issue of let's create spaces where everybody has a little bit more privacy. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in an era where there was zero closed stalls and zero closed showers, and showered with everybody in sports, and it's weird even if you are the same here, and there's no crossover. And so I think it's okay what we're seeing today. And as a coach, I come to you and tell you this is kids aren't changing in front of each other anymore. It's just they're very private, and I think that's okay. We just embrace that and say, hey, let's create spaces and systems that support people's ability to have a safe space to have that privacy and come into their own at their own pace. So Marion. If you're talking, I think on mute, Marion.
I do that a lot. I would be remiss if I didn't say that when we're in a situation where the person who is oppressed is left to solve the problem on their own, is can very much feel like being abandoned. And I
Sure.
speak to you as a person who is now disabled, and for many able years thought I wouldn't have any problem if I had to use a walker to get in a restaurant or a bathroom anywhere I went. And
Right.
I can no longer travel because the lack of the regulation is there, but the actual accommodation is not. And
Yeah.
I speak to you about restaurants in Butte, all of whom will tell you that they obey the American Disabilities Act. And maybe in thought, and maybe that's what we can try to go for with respect to sexuality. But even then, we will struggle. So this isn't a problem that will go away for any group, just like, a year ago, we probably all thought immigrants were fine here in all over the country, and that's just not the case. So I hear you, and I put a little asterisk about. I
Yeah.
want you to forget when you win and you get to DC. I'll remind you of this
Yeah.
moment.
Please do. And again, I don't think, to me, this is not taking a focus away from a group of people that deserve support. I think it's trying to steal the power away from the oppressors themselves and say, not on my watch, and I think that's where we start. And it has to be us willing to say, yep, fine. Then I'm fine with it the way it is. And there's some separation there. Focus on, the 50,000 people that are about to lose healthcare in this state. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I'm here in Missoula. I just would kind of reinforce your point. This is not the winning subject. That is not to mean that it's not meaningful, but it's not going to win you the election. And so focusing on the broader electorate and the people that you're trying to peel away is the important thing. So not to dismiss it, not to minimize it, but focus and let your voice be heard on the subjects that have broad appeal, and not just, I live in Missoula. I don't get a broad swath of the Flathead electorate,
Right.
but I am. We need to win by not elevating this issue. You don't have a vote if you don't win the election, so
Exactly.
you need to get in your seat by appealing to the broader electorate. So
Yep.
that would be my comment. And
I appreciate your comments, Scott. You're right on the money, and I think most of us are realizing that, right? And honestly, I think most of us in Montana probably knew and felt that way to begin with. From the folks I've talked to, what tends to happen is some former candidates have spent a lot of money on consultants that push for opinions and policies that they've never even stepped foot in Montana, and they're trying to do blanket approach that isn't asking the people of Montana what their opinion is. And so I think for me, it's just about spending time out talking to Montanans and saying, where are you at on this? And I've done a lot of that over the last 4 months, and that's what helped kind of formulate this approach. So, okay, moving on. I'm glad we didn't spend a half an hour there, because I thought for sure we'd dig some trenches there together, but I'm glad to hear you guys are feeling the same way. This is a big one. Living costs are still high. Gas, groceries, housing. As a representative, can you do anything to ease that burden for Montanans and Americans? I'll tell you guys, if you haven't jumped on my website yet, and I just released it last week, so you may have seen my initial political views, but there's an entire platform now that's been released in the last week that's hyper focused on actual action items to address just this, which is most of these fall under affordability, one of my 5 buckets. And so I encourage you to read in depth on those. Affordability is a major, I would call it a crisis in this state. We're 13% higher for groceries than any other state in the country, or the national average, I guess it is. Our average house price is $600,000 now. And there's just increasingly difficult ways to survive in this amazing state. So I'm just going to bounce a few off of you, and then I challenge you guys to go and read in depth about these. I told you I spent a good time in finance. I think one way we can get more people into houses is mortgage reform. And so one of the biggest issues with people being forced, so it's a supply and demand issue. You have a choked supply of housing, and the housing that is available is relatively expensive, and not many people qualify it because of income qualification standards. I'm going to leave that there for a second for you to think about. So what happens to those people that can't qualify there is then they're forced into a rental market, which drives demand up for rent. And because that rental market is now saturated, landlords and part of this is because of lack of rental availability, they've raised those prices as well. And so now we have both rents and housing for purchase that are exceedingly high and pricing most of our middle class out entirely. So one of the ways to attack this is through mortgage reform, and there's two different pieces on this. There's both mortgage reform and lending reform. So one idea with mortgage reform is taking federally backed loans from 30 years to 40 years. And most people think, who the hell would want to pay 40 years on a loan? But you have to remember that most people only spend 11.9 years in a home on average anyways. Then they sell. So what we're doing is controlling the monthly payment, not necessarily the term. When you're talking about a first-time home buyer, getting into that home is the first and most important step that is based around building equity and thereby building wealth. And so if you're not paying it towards principal balance, then you're paying it towards a landlord and their principal balance instead via rent, and then you never get that balance back. And that brings me to lending reform. So lending reform, most people know mortgages are amortized. So it's spread over 30 years, but it's front loaded with all your interest. So in that 11, 12 years, most of that you're paying is interest. So for quick math, if you have a $500,000 house at today's rate, 6.5% on a 30-year loan, at that 12-year mark, you're going to have paid $98,000 towards principal on a traditional 30-year loan, amortized 30-year loan, right? So most of that other payment that you made was interest. We're not counting escrow, taxes, and insurance. That's a whole different beast we'll get to on property taxes in Montana. But if we're just looking at the principal, you paid $98,000. If the federal government is legislated in a way that requires federally backed loans to provide borrowers an option for a fee simple loan, which is equal interest payments, the payment doesn't change for the borrower, but the amount of principal they're paying towards that loan does. And in that 12 years, it takes them from having paid $98,000 towards principal. Now they have $200,000. So when they sell that $500,000 home, they now have an extra $102,000 in their pocket that would have gone to a bank in interest otherwise. That is systematic oppression. So that to me is the bank saying, great, we're going to get rich off of people wanting to own homes in this country. And instead, it keeps the middle and lower class oppressed and financially to where they can never actually reach the equity and wealth of those who own multiple properties because they're stuck in this recurring interest cycle. Now, here's the catch. You don't have to go one or the other. You can give them both options because some people really do want to buy a home and stay in it for 30 years, and amortized is cheaper for you over 30 years over fee simple. But most people sell a home in 12 years, and in that time, most people refinance in 5 to 7. And so what we're talking about doing is just getting people in the door. And that's the most important part of this, is saying, get more people into the housing market that then deflates the demand on rentals and brings those prices down, and it allows them to start accruing some wealth. So those are those first two. The next one is universal childcare, and we're going to talk about this on another slide. But what we're seeing, there's already been kind of a pilot, if you will, in New Mexico. They were able to bring 7% of their people above the poverty line just by providing universal childcare. That was 120,000 people. And so by having universal childcare, there's a couple things that most people think of, and most of you probably won't think of it this way, but I frame it this way to independents and conservatives because it's easy to go down this road of thinking this is a welfare program or a social program. The universal childcare, for every dollar that you spend, is a $4 to $9 return in GDP. It's an economic stimulator. And the reason that happens is right now, childcare in Montana, 1 year for one child of childcare costs more than 1 year of college tuition in this state. It's a second mortgage for most people. And so what you're talking about is it does not make sense to have, in many cases, to have both parents working if one parent's income is essentially going to childcare. And so you have less people in the workforce, which then also reduces the total household income, which then keeps more people out of housing and makes more people stuck in that perpetual wealth disparity cycle that we're seeing. And so when I say it's a rising tide raises all ships, this is truly a rising tide raises all ships. If you're the owner of the company and you're starving to have good employees, guess what? You just doubled your workforce. If you're the employee themselves and you're not sure that you can pick up those extra couple hours a week because you have to go pick up your kid from school at 3 o'clock, not anymore. You can pick up those couple extra hours and know that your kid's in a safe license program and thriving in that environment. So I'll pause on that one till later because there are a few other points I want to bring up on universal childcare, but that's another opportunity as a representative. This will be one of my primary platform initiatives to push. Having run a childcare company for the last 10 years, it's one that I know inside and out. The other one is a property tax cap, and we see this in Montana because states like Colorado, Montana, New York, California, well now Washington, a lot of these states are seeing these inflated property prices that have a multiplier, so to speak, attached to them based off of home value. Well, in many cases, people bought a house for $90,000 in 1990, and now that house is appraising at 1.5 million, and they're trying to on Social Security. That's crazy. And so what we need to have is a tax, and there's a couple different ways to do this, where we can look at a cap that's based off of total value at the half-life of your home, so that if you were to have bought a home 30, 40 years ago, and it's accrued to 1.5 million, maybe the max it can be a value that if you're staying in that home is half the value, right? The other way is a flat cap, where instead of paying 1 or 1.29%, it's a flat cap or across the board at 0.5% for any private residences. So I'm playing with some different ideas on what the best caps would be for the working class in this state. But as you know, like that data is very fluctuating right now because home prices in the state have just gone hog wild. So, but I'm looking at some data to see what the best type of cap would be that would especially veterans, people on Social Security or fixed incomes, students or first-time home buyers. I mean, look, a quick stat for you guys. Ages 17 to 24, the homelessness rate is now 10% for that population. If you look at all of adults, it's 0.23%. So there's a big difference between 0.23% and 10%. What that's telling us is that people are coming out of a home environment in high school or whatnot, and there's no system set up for them to actually get into a house and be able to afford it, which is causing this systematic homelessness. The last one is income tax reform. And I encourage you to just read through this one on my website. But really, what this is about is saying we have a threshold, the single person threshold for poverty in Montana, I believe, is right around 16,000. And so my proposal is to say on that first 16,000, there's zero federal tax. And so if you're in that poverty level, you don't pay tax. If you make 30,000, you don't pay tax on that first 16,000. If you make 100,000, you don't pay tax on that first 16,000. And then have a progressive scale again back in order, much like Brian was saying, that eats that up. And that means actually taxing the rich what they're owed. But that first 15,000 allows for people to actually survive. If they're only making 20,000 here, they're not going to be taxed, a disproportionate rate that makes it impossible to survive, which is already that case. So I'll stop there. I talked a lot. Any questions on any of those points that I talked about? No. Scott.
I guess as far as one thing with taxes that really irritates me is one thing that gets lost a lot is we talk about we can't raise taxes on the rich because they're job creators. Having done my own somewhat complicated taxes over the years, I think there's a big disconnect in realizing that if I have a business and I buy a vehicle and hire somebody, I'm not paying taxes on the money that goes to support that. I'm paying taxes on the take home. I'm paying taxes on net, not gross. And that is so lost in all these conversations. We're talking about taxing corporations or high income individuals. If they make a job, if they create a job, if they invest in building their business, that is not a taxable expense. And that needs to be elevated in that conversation.
Yeah, you're very right. And having just come off a company where I employed roughly 200 people, I can tell you I've been there and I get that. And the tax code gets increasingly difficult the deeper you get into that. I think we just need, honestly, a more simple tax code that holds those people making the higher up levels of income accountable to pay their fair share, and whether they're a business owner or not, right? Like if you're a business owner and you're not taking a W-2, that's one thing most people don't realize is they're taking most of their income through a K-1 and they're writing off a lot of those expenses, but they're still making $1.5 million and figuring out loopholes to pay taxes on, maybe their maxed out W-2 income of 75,000 or whatever their accountants telling them to do. And so it's a broken system that needs to be reformed. That's actually realistic towards paying down national debt and not putting more money in the pockets of billionaires. So, all right. Moving on. How specifically will you champion better childcare and paid leave for parents? I'm just going to hit these points. We talked a little bit about my approach. One of the things I see as a positive as a dissolution of Department of Education is it's not if, but when it's rebuilt, we can build it in a way that actually makes sense for 2025 or 2027 or 2030, whatever year that is, instead of trying to run a Department of Education that was built in the 1940s. And so there's a lot that needs to change, including educator wages, the pipeline in terms of are we making students relearn things in years 13 and 14, meaning their freshman and sophomore year of college, that they just learned in their junior and senior year of high school, but now we're charging them, $12,000 a year in student debt to relearn those same things. And student debt is one of the biggest leading causes of failure in this country financially. And so I think we just have to be smarter on how we create this pipeline from birth to workforce. And so my plan to do that is it starts at birth and taking care of mom and dad and actually giving them a paid leave of 6 weeks to immerse that new child into their family and not punish the small business or the company because of it. From a small business perspective, it's very difficult to have a crucial employee leave that you then have to shoulder the payment on and backfill for them. And so I think similar to unemployment insurance and other programs, there needs to be an opportunity for us to, take care of our moms and dads and say, hey, this is a great opportunity for you to focus on your family, and knowing that it's going to pay dividends both to the workforce side and to the family growth and stability side. Maybe we'll actually see a change in our declining birth rate instead of trying to pay moms off with a $5,000 paycheck. to have more kids, right? The next one is roll out universal childcare from 6 weeks to 36 months. So most people confuse childcare and universal pre-K and aftercare. It's all kind of under this umbrella of childcare, but really the most expensive part for parents is that early childhood from birth to really 3, and in most states up to 5. That's the most expensive and hardest care to find. There's additional qualifications to run a center. The ratios are lower, so you're typically talking 8-to-1 or 5-to-1 instead of 15-to-1 in a school age environment. And so it's a much more expensive business to run. There's very little, if any, wiggle room. And so I think that's why we see childcare deserts where there's not a lot of providers, is the margins are razor thin, and there's little to no support or stability in that industry. So having it be a federally backed program not only creates a universal standard of care, where we can dictate things like background checks and make sure that the safety factor is there, but we can also have a universal standard in terms of making sure that where this pipeline, so to speak, of care prepping them for a school environment helps them on an education scale as well for years to come. Which brings me to universal pre-K. I helped launch and implement universal pre-K in Colorado. A wildly successful program. They did it early in knowing that there was going to be this huge learning gap caused from COVID learning loss, which most of those kids are now in 3rd to 5th grade that are experiencing the biggest levels of loss. But the children who went through universal pre-K are already caught back up. And so oftentimes what we see is having that 3 to 5 be more structured in terms of tactile learning and social emotional learning. They're ready and engaged when they hit kindergarten. And it doesn't become this lag in terms of allowing them the time and space to know how to operate in a classroom environment, in a learning environment, and in an environment with other children. So that's very important, I think, if we want to look at improving our education as an overall society, which is we have to be willing to invest in our kids. I mean, they are truly our future. And the last one is many schools, especially public schools, get out at 2:30, 3:30, and it makes it very difficult for a workforce to actually sustain a meaningful employment if there's not some sort of enrichment or after school program, immediately after school in that public or charter school environment that those children can engage in. And so if we did it in a way that we could supplement things that the school may not have budget for or has historically cut out, like art programs, STEM programs, music programs, even physical education programs, we're able to net positive that education learning loss in an after school environment. And I think, that's going to be very, very important moving forward in terms of prepping people for the workforce. So I'll stop there. I have some great pipeline, like continuation of high school into college and how we can get the trades back online, how we can make student debt reduced by allowing years 11 and 12 to count for college credit, so that kids are graduating, and this is already happening in many programs, but kids are graduating with an associate's or a trades degree, trades training, instead of forcing them into this perpetual cycle of student debt. But I just encourage you, out of the essence of time, I know we only have a 15-minute window left, to jump online and read more about that. And of course, you can always schedule a one-on-one time with me. I have a link that says chat with Russ or schedule with Russ. That's just grab a 15-minute phone call with me if you'd like to talk more one-on-one on things. I'm happy to do that with any of you around any of these topics. The next one, I'm going to kind of breeze through these, even though I know they're hot topics, but someone wrote human rights issues, and we could go down a lot of different pathways in terms of which human rights issues we want to talk about. Immigration, obviously, I think most of us agree that we don't want rapists, murderers, violent criminals entering our country illegally. The problem is those are not the people that are being picked up. 70% of the people being deported have no criminal background. They're honest, hardworking immigrants, doing construction, doing agriculture, doing even retail and restaurant work, and it's impacting real American businesses, small businesses. It's impacting the shelves. It's impacting our economy. And so it's not just a human rights issue, it's also an economic issue. So we could spend probably an entire 2-hour session just on immigration, which maybe that's what we'll do next time, is we'll talk about that. But voting rights is one I'm concerned about, that's come to the top of the ticket here in the last week or so. President Trump's looking at executive order to ban mail-in ballots and electronic voting. As we know, that will push many people with disabilities in remote or rural areas who may have trouble getting to precincts out of the voting system altogether, and helps them sway the vote. And so that's another area I think is going to be a human rights, or at least a civic rights issue that we need to stay focused on. Women's rights obviously has been under attack with the reversal of Roe Wade. It will continue to be a conversation, I think, for many elections to come. I think it's gender targeting, but one of the bigger issues I'm looking at is there is this underlying conversation going on from people in the White House about even women's right to vote. So I think we need to watch that one as well. We talked a little bit about media control. There is some free information targeting going on with PBS, NPR. I encourage you guys, obviously I've asked you to donate to your candidates and campaigns, but if you're able to help sustain, local free news outlets as well by subscribing to their $8 or $10 a month service, whatever it is, I highly encourage you to do that and help keep those, newspaper and news sources independent and free, and obviously in business. One big one that I am passionate about is our allied accountability. And what I mean by that is, to what extent are we willing to say this is an ally of ours, and so we're going to turn a blind eye to the atrocities that they do day in and day out, no matter who it is. And what I'm talking about more specifically is Israel and Gaza, and obviously Ukraine and Russia. And to me, if you take in many of these issues, if you take the religious piece away from it, it seems like it should be a no-brainer. But you don't have to pick sides in this, right? Like, I think we can say, hey, yes, we want all the hostages back. And yes, we don't want the equivalent of 6 atomic bombs dropped on Gaza either, right? So I think there needs to be accountability and a complete cutoff of resources to countries like Israel when they are disregarding international humanitarian laws. And until that happens, they get things like free healthcare and free education. And guess who pays for all of those things? We're the ones subsidizing them, yet we won't even do it for the American people, and we'll turn a blind eye to them operating outside of traditional wartime rules. So I'll pause there briefly if anyone has a comment on that. I know that's a big one, but we do have 8 other questions to get through here. So if nobody else has a question, I'm going to keep going. Why do I think I can beat Zinke? Well, number one, I'll just be honest, he sucks, both as a human and as a legislator. But I will say the man is very disciplined, and he's got billionaire-backed donors. And so I think there's some real opportunity to beat him by supporting things like the Montana Plan, which is essentially a bypass over Citizens United, the Citizens United ruling that would no longer allow for corporate or dark money to enter Montana elections. So if you haven't heard about that, I recommend you look into that. That levels the playing field for candidates like me. That if I raise $1 million, he'll raise 2. If I raise 10 million, he'll raise 20. So I don't think we need to chase this game in terms of of how much money can we spend. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I think I removed some of his legs up. I'm also a Navy veteran. I'm also a generational Montanan. I'm also a man. I'm also, I can also wakeboard if that matters or anything, because I think we post a lot of pictures about that. But all jokes aside, I think leveling the playing field with him will help. Something I'm not afraid to do that the no Republicans are doing are meeting constituents face to face. I'd have no problem going to the Bitterroot Valley and sitting in a room full of Republicans and having the same conversation with them. They're not going to agree with everything I have to say, but I think there's an opportunity to say, hey, we can disagree, but we need to bring some respect back to our conversation and be willing to talk to each other again. And that's not being done right now. And I think we got to get back to that if we want to see any real progress. And then I think we just focus on the lack of campaign follow-throughs. I had an opportunity to pull the data from every campaign promise he's ever made and the data of every campaign promise or every legislative issue he's ever voted on. And I can tell you the contrast between those two things is effectively black and white. And you can bet that I'm not going to be afraid to push those out. I will not post things like me jumping on beds in his Airbnb and saying that, he shouldn't have VRBOs, but I will say he's promised you this 100 times and he's delivered 0 times. And I think people have to see that data to remember that it's real. And are we going to keep voting and supporting for the same thing over and over? Brian.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think we saw a couple of election cycles like the Monica's ad that you mentioned, and also John Tester, the shady Sheehy approach really didn't work that well. So I think it's, as you say, it's really important to focus on their lack of follow through on promises rather than, sort of personality.
Yeah, my commitment to you all is I'm focused on solutions, not slander. And it's on some of my banners. I have no problem saying, hey, this person has promised for 10 years or 8 years or 6 years that he's going to do these things, but votes against it every time. That's different than, I think, a name calling or slander campaign. And honestly, I think Montanans, and this is something I've heard from you all, they're sick of it. They don't pay attention to that anyways. And it doesn't change hearts and minds of the people who are on the fence. Whereas policy documentation showing what he has and hasn't actually supported over the last 10 years does change hearts and minds. And I think that's where we make the most traction in terms of gaining more support and votes against him. Question 10, what ideas do you have to actually make our district a representative democracy? A little bit of what you already said, but we never hear our current rep talk about the work he is doing. Even when you call his office, you get a taped message how we do better. So here's some of the things I'm bringing to you all. If elected, you'll be able to see every meeting I have with whether it's a lobbyist, another senator or House representative, all that will be transparent because I have nothing to hide. And I think if I'm taking a meeting with a corporate lobbyist that's representing some sort of industry, ultimately every single Montanan should know why, and I should know whether constituents support it or not. So if I can be transparent on what that meeting's about and say, hey, there's an opportunity to potentially bring this industry back to Montana. What do the people of Montana think? And there's an overwhelming pushback to say, hell no, we don't want that here. Then that's the support that should be given, not the other one to say, there's a potential corporate donor here that I could get for my next election. And that's the transparency that we're missing. So I think that's one. Scheduled in district time, they get these times out of session, especially the last 4 years, and they're nowhere to be seen. I think our representatives have forgotten that they're paid a salary for a year-round job. It's not just the time that they're in the chamber. And so I think what that means is similar to campaigning, there needs to be time when you're booked in each of these districts talking to people about what happened at the last session and about what's expected to come. And so that's another commitment. I think it should be pre-scheduled, 6 months or a year in advance. People need to know when that is and when you're going to be back in district. Things like this, quarterly webinars, kind of a state of the district of saying, hey, anyone that wants to listen or plug in, these are the 20 bills that we're pushing, and this is how it'll affect Montanans. Have guest speakers on that can help better explain things. I don't plan to approach this as being an expert in any of these areas. I think the best leaders are not the smartest one in the room. They surround themselves with people smarter than them. And it's important to let those people actually speak their profession and their experience and say, hey, this person's a forestry expert. He's worked in forestry for 35 years, and this is how this is going to impact Montana forestry. And have that person actually talk about it instead of, giving a political 2-minute spiel on what that actually looks like. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I have scheduled time available right now. I'm sure my schedule will be much busier, but I think that having that availability still where it's, hey, grab 10 minutes or grab 15 minutes and actually talk to people. And that's what, there's no better investment to stay elected, I think, than just to continue to be available for people in Montana. So those are the 4 things to answer that question. Question 11, how will you work to close the wealth gap? I'm going to punt on this one just so that out of the essence of time, I dive in to this in great detail on my platform page. So I encourage you to jump into it there. But there's just a couple quick statistics there that I had already mentioned about bringing people back above poverty level, making banks accountable and giving some of that equity back to the Montana people. I think the biggest one I haven't covered that is an important one to mention here would be capping executive pay to the lowest employee at no more than 50-1, so that we don't have CEOs making $300 million a year when their lowest paid employee is still making $10.30 an hour. That's to me is un-American. And I think that's one way that we can close the wealth gap as well. Question 12, how to educate Montanans that are ignorant of the adverse impact on them. We talked about how people have to feel it a little bit. One of the many things I like to do is ask and then tell. So storytelling, I think, is going to be important to all of you. So when I say get out in your communities, talk to your neighbors, pretend you're doing a biography. Ask questions and then use them to inform other people. Well, I understand your opinion on that, but if you met Maria, she's 2 blocks over. She actually lost Medicaid because of this big, beautiful bill. And that's our neighbor that's actually now without health care because of Zinke's choice to make these cuts so that his billionaire buddies could line his pockets. The more we can connect the dots in our communities, the more I think we will continue to pull people out of that ignorance, so to speak. And we talked about the rest of these already. How do we protect the economy from self-destructive terrorists? Brian, you brought this one up. Best way, get rid of Trump, right? I think that's the best way, but that's not as easy as it looks. I think the long term, we need to pass that congressional trade requirement. I talked about a 60-day window where Congress has to take over from there. And then there's a loophole right now that needs to be revoked. It's outdated, shouldn't be applicable. But right now, presidents can lean on a national security loophole that allows them to blanket apply this tariff. And so that'll be one of the first things I attack is removing that national security loophole so that we don't have this executive order mayhem. Do you have access to the kinds of money it takes to win this race? I'm going to be honest with you guys. No. I am not a millionaire. I have a mortgage just like all of you guys. I dread my car insurance payment and my home insurance payment just like all of you guys. I dread a trip to Costco for my family with the 6 kids just like you guys. But here's what I do have. I have an opportunity to run a campaign for the next 1.5 years without having to work a full-time job. And I attribute that largely to my wife. She's one of the hardest working people I know. She's our breadwinner right now. But she is holding down the fort for us so that I can really try and make positive change for our state and country. And that gives me the opportunity to be on the road a lot and be in front of people a lot. So what I do have is time. I have knowledge, I have passion, and like I mentioned to you guys, one of the most important things centered to myself as a person is a strong sense of morality, an internal moral compass. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm a family man by nature, and I think we just have to bring that back. We have to build trust, not line pockets. And then I also think, I'm going into this just like a donor. And I think if we want to fix campaign finance, then there should be some limitations on how much a candidate can bring. If you can only donate $3,500, I should only be able to donate $3,500, because this is not me buying my position. It should be me representing constituents. And until we can get that fixed to where it's not me saying, hey, I have $13 million I'm going to bring to this and self-fund myself into Congress, this system will stay perpetually broken. And so I think we have to get away from this self-funding idea and say, hey, this is a group effort. And for some of us, $10 is all we can afford. And for others, $3,500 is no problem. But ultimately, it should be the people in this district paying for and electing the person that's representing them, not dark money from different parts of the country and party, not corporate sponsorships. It should be the people. And then I think that covers that one. I mentioned the Montana plan. Citizens United has to go. It's a mess. It's destroying our democracy. And I think until we reform or remove Citizens United, the Montana plan is the next best thing. It was my first endorsement. If you didn't see that, it'll be hitting papers all across the state here this week. It was my first endorsement as a candidate that I said, look, everybody needs to get behind this, whether no matter what side of the fence you sit on. This is a net positive for every Montanan to get corporate and dark money out of politics and add some transparency back to elections. So I'll continue to fight for campaign finance reform. I think we need to also look at including a cap on the top end of how much somebody can collect. So it evens the playing field to say, if there's 450,000 people registered to vote in your district, and we do a net $10 per head cap, that means both candidates or all candidates would have a $4.5 million budget max. So that who's better with money? Because I don't know if anyone's checked, there's a $37 trillion deficit or debt that we have to figure out how to fix. And so if you can't figure out how to manage a campaign budget effectively and run a smart campaign, why should we trust you with being able to run a national budget? And so I think that's an important piece part of this campaign reform is setting a cap on the top end. And we talked a little bit about getting away from slander. And I think there'd be some great opportunities to do some truth in campaigning laws as well. Similar to what we see in like truth in lending, right? Everything fully disclosed. How much did you spend? What did you spend it on? What are you paying consultants? Basically everything should be out there in the public so that you guys can see what every candidate spends their money on. And we're almost 5 minutes over, but this is our last slide. So I just wanted to take a quick minute to answer any final questions that you all have. Anybody watching live, anybody watching on Instagram or Facebook, and everybody on this call, I will say, again, thank you all for supporting me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. You all are my motivation for doing this. We're all in this together, and many of you are donors already, but I hope to continue to earn your support both as donors. Donate today if you can, but also jump on and fill out a volunteer form, volunteer where you can. And probably the biggest thing is continue to spread the word. And ultimately, donor dollars and volunteer efforts go to one thing, and that's building a brand, building a network, building a movement towards a brighter tomorrow. And I think if we can all buy into that together, then we'll continue to move the needle for many years to come and protect this place we call home. So I'll stop there. Anybody got any final questions or thoughts for me? All right. Well, thanks for jumping on tonight. This will be posted and available for you to share with friends and family and coworkers and whatnot. Give us a day or two to process the video, but the slide deck will be incorporated so you all can see the questions and answers as well. In the meantime, jump on the website, russellcleveland.org, and check out some of those platform initiatives we talked about. And you'll see all the links to donate and volunteer right there on the homepage. So have a wonderful night. And I look forward to seeing some of you in the coming days. And we'll chat then. Signing off. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good job tonight. Oh. Thanks, Kenneth.